he basically asked for a timeline for security guarantees, alluding to NATO membership. Would you be willing to give him such guarantees at this point, or how do you react to that? And Congressman Schiff, you said that Ukraine's struggle is your struggle. Volodymyr Zelensky said, there is, in the 21st century, there is no more not my war. So would Ukraine's war also be your war?
Let me just say that we represent a small fraction of our congressional delegation, because they told us only 4 people could fit in the room. But we've had leaders from the Armed Services Committee, from the Foreign Armed Services Committee, self-described, and the Foreign Affairs Committee, which has jurisdiction over sanctions, the Intelligence Committee, the other committees that have some play in all of this. And so we listened with great interest to President Zelensky's speech and presentation, really proclamation, and it was very courageous, and it was clear to understand when people said, why would he come here at a time of threat to his country? Well, he had a mission and he accomplished it. But it isn't for any one nation to be saying that another nation should be part of NATO. We just met with the Secretary General of NATO, for whom we have great respect. And again, it's self-determined by a country that they might want to make the appeal. It's up to all of NATO to decide the timing and the geography of NATO. We have a great deal of respect for the Secretary General. On the 70th anniversary of NATO, which was 3 years ago about, I invited him to address Secretary General Stoltenberg to address a joint session of Congress, which is a high privilege and a rare honor. He honored us with his presentation about NATO. And again, it's not for us to say here and now about the expansion of NATO. I was present at the expansion of NATO in 1997 with President Clinton and Senator Biden at the time. And the enthusiasm to expanding it then was great, and the Partnership for Peace that existed. And NATO has to go through that cumulatively. That's the kind of ideas. But should we, and look, the assault, Putin's assault on Putin's assault on the Ukraine is an assault on democracy. We all have to know that and respond in ways that are effective, appropriate, and in some cases, not speaking human-wise, but technology-wise, deadly. Yes, sir. You had a follow-up from Mr.
Because you said that Ukraine's struggle is your struggle. Volodymyr Zelensky said there is no more not your war in the 21st century. So is Ukraine's war also your war?
Well, I think to the extent that Putin's motivation is to put down a budding democracy on his doorstep. The fact that Putin was, I think, terrified by the success of color revolutions around the world, and the example that it poses for the Russian people. Why should the Russian people be forced to live under dictatorship if Ukraine can be a successful democracy? Why can't they be as well? And in that sense, yes, I think an attack on Ukraine to try to put down that democracy is attack on democracy generally. And I do agree with President Zelensky that the rest of the world is watching this. And if we don't act in unison to bring about the toughest sanctions that have ever been deployed, then other nations will feel free to subjugate their democratic neighbors. I think what gives me heart is to see the remarkable solidarity of NATO. I think something that must have come as a rude shock to Vladimir Putin, just how strong and quickly we came together, and the power of the punishing sanctions. And so I think we will demonstrate, if necessary, and again, we hope that it won't be necessary, but we will demonstrate that this is all of our fight by the strength of the costs we impose on Russia if they invade.
If I just may say on that question, we're not for any war. And the diplomacy. And that's why we're talking about sanctions in the event of an invasion. And these are sanctions as if you've never seen before in terms of the intensity and the timing. NATO is ready. The US and NATO are ready. So this is not going to be something that takes a long time. They'll be strong and they will be swift. And it might even include SWIFT. We don't know. That's still a matter of negotiation. But it is in terms of that banking system, not that adjective, not that timetable. Why Putin thinks that there's an appetite for what I don't even think the Russian mothers want to see their sons or daughters come home in body bags. For what reason? To kill Slavs? To kill Ukrainians? Ethnically similar, and the rest, neighbors. So it is, there is a price to pay in terms of personal cost, in terms of what happens in Russia, if they even report it in Russia, and again, in terms of that. But it's not a question of saying whose war is what war, with all due respect to the president. I thought his presentation was a tour de force. He had a mission, he came, he accomplished it, he challenged what is the effectiveness of these institutions that have been, whether it's the UN, the EU, the NATO, and the rest. If our people have to die, it's a legitimate question. We don't think war is the answer. You had one more question?
Yes.
I was going to close, yeah.
So if there is an invasion in the next couple of days, will Congress come back early, and what will Congress do in response? And if I may also, for Chairman Schiff, a question, if you could talk about the latest intelligence, the strongest intelligence that shows that, you know, an invasion is indeed imminent. What is the strongest intelligence you have?
That you can talk about.
You won't tell anyone.
Well, I share our president's conviction that there is a strong likelihood of a Russian invasion. They've amassed an enormous force that they have drawn from all over Russia. They have developed detailed plans for false flag operations to serve as a pretext to mislead the world about who is the source of aggression. And Ukraine poses no military threat to Russia. So why undertake those actions? With what goal in mind? And nonetheless, until Putin gives the decision, we continue to urge diplomacy. We hope that there is a way to provide an off-ramp for the Kremlin. But it will be up to Putin to take it. But I do believe that the intelligence supports the president's conclusion and his conviction about Putin's intentions. I hope that we can find another path through diplomacy.
Did you have a two-pronged question?
The first question was, will Congress come back?
Oh, well, let me just say this. In terms of the sanctions, which is what we have been talking about as if he goes in, the president has the authority to implement those sanctions without the Congress. We have a bill in the House, the Meeks bill, and the Senate Menendez bill, which are pretty much the same, mirror each other. One of the questions between the parties is, do you go put the sanctions first or you put them after he goes in? You know, in case he was going to be doing it 2 weeks from now, do it now. Generally, the consensus was that since many European countries will feel some of the pain of the sanctions, not to do it until and if he goes in. But let me say this personally. You're first to know. Don't tell anybody I told you this, okay? There's a price to pay for what Putin has put us through now. This isn't bully the world and then take a walk and you're off the hook. So I do think that there will be in Congress, from our own standpoint, now we'd rather not, we'd rather always work in a multilateral way. But that does take time and consensus and ironing out differences, but we may want to make a statement in that regard. It is, but the President has, by executive order, the authority to implement the sanctions. From what we have heard from our different meetings that I mentioned to you earlier, that there is a readiness on the part of NATO and the NATO countries to be very soon in this. I'm going to say one more thing, but before I do, I want to yield to my colleagues for any closing statements.
Well, I was just going to say, Madam Speaker, thank you so much for bringing us here, because what we did in preparation is the Biden administration provided a briefing in which both Democrats and Republicans attended, and both were very thoughtful and very thorough. And so we're here as a delegation with Speaker Pelosi, but there's also other U.S. delegations here. So we're bicameral, we're bipartisan, we're united, NATO's united, the EU's united, and we're ready to do what it takes if Russia walks away and does not listen to us carefully and allow diplomacy to be given a fruitful chance. So we're very united, and I'm very grateful that I got to see the other countries here united in this effort to stop the attacks on democracy.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And let me just close my remarks by saying once again that I chair the subcommittee that invests and funds all of our diplomatic initiatives throughout the world. And I was struck by the unity here by putting diplomacy first and by the language on the back of the chairs in the conference room that said peace through dialogue. And let's be hopeful that that's where we end with this crisis before us with Ukraine. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
That's a nice way of saying what we say is jaw, 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 not war, war, war. Did you have a closing statement? Well, I just would like to get back to something Madam Chair Barbara Lee said earlier about democracy and the threat to democracy that Putin is foisting onto Ukraine. I'm going to quote a Republican president, Ronald Reagan. He said, "Freedom is a fragile thing, and it is never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation." We understand that responsibility. We know the threats that are there. We saw Putin try to influence our election in 2016 in some ways successfully for him. We saw his impact on some elections in the rest of the world. We see his misinformation constantly. I heard from in Moldova, the impression among some people in the population is that Ukraine did something and Russia has to respond to it. Here's some other misinformation in other countries that are in NATO and not in NATO about the misinformation that is out there. And all of that misinformation is a threat to democracy and people making thoughtful decisions based on the truth. So as we are here, it's really important for you to know that I've never seen NATO more, and I've been coming to these NATO meetings one way or another for a very long time. I also have been going for more than 25 years to intelligence briefings, and I can say flat out, and I think some of my Republican colleagues would agree, that the intelligence briefing, we asked for the entire House to get the briefing, was the best, most serious and well-received briefing that I've ever seen given to Congress in terms of the threat, the intelligence about the intent, the casualty count that would come with it, how can I say it, the weaponry that is at everybody's disposal. And by weaponry, I don't necessarily mean a lethal weapon, but a sanction and the rest, and what the impact on that would be. So people are pretty ready. They're pretty ready, and I think it's really an eloquent statement to be ready, to be prepared, well, same thing, prepared with the sanctions, so it won't take a long time if he decides to go on. And it won't be a long time for the Russian people, sadly, to feel the impact of the what insecure decisions being made by their president for what no purpose, no good purpose at all. But anyway, we're happy about the unity we see in NATO. We're happy about the unity we see with NATO, EU, US, Canada, North America, and we go home strengthened and encouraged by that. I would say hopeful, but we can only be hopeful if we can stop the aggression. I'll just say this one more thing. Some of the groups that I've heard the most from in preparation for this trip were our veterans, and our veterans just kept saying something, diplomacy, 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 as you said earlier. Diplomacy, diplomacy, diplomacy. So for our veterans and their families, and for the families of all of Europe and Russia, let's hope that sanity prevails. Thank you all.